Hello, Cleveland. Welcome back to another edition of the 1085 Gridiron Podcast. I am your host, Jack McCurry, and joining me once again is contributor to thedogland.com, Jack Duffin. Jack, how's everything going?
I'm good. I'm happy to be back. Obviously means one thing. There must be cap news.
Yes. There's Browns news, there's cap news, and anytime we got stuff going on with contracts or the cap, we definitely bring you on. You bring great insight to that. We are getting more Browns news as we get closer to training camp. Today, it's probably going to be the majority of this episode. Olivier Vernon and the Browns agreed to a contract restructure. Vernon was coming in. He was slated to make $15.25 million, which was the biggest salary on the Browns roster. None of that was guaranteed. I'm pretty sure, but they have restructured the deal. According to reports, Field Yates of ESPN was the first to report this. Vernon is going to have a $3.75 million base salary. He's getting a $7 million signing bonus. His $250,000 workout bonus, which I'm pretty sure all teams are giving those to players this year as long as they participate in the virtual offseason programs because of the pandemic that's going on. But he also is getting $2 million in incentives. Vernon last year came over in the Odell Beckham trade. A lot of people envisioned him being a solid pass rusher opposite Myles Garrett. And he was when he was on the field, but obviously he had a knee injury about halfway through the year, sidelined him for 6 games. He only had 3.5 sacks, but people just tend to look at the sacks and think he wasn't productive, but he was productive, and so much so that Pro Football Focus, one of their writers, called him the most underrated player on the Cleveland Browns. Jack, when you look at the restructure, does it make sense from the Browns' perspective and Vernon to work something out to where he's guaranteed to be on the roster for the 2020 season?
Yeah, I think they've been really, really smart with this. They've had a good look. What's out there? Can they get a better deal? Because they're not on the cards. They don't have to pay him. They could have walked away, signed Clowney. They could have signed Griffin. So they've gone out there and have had a really, really good look, which is a smart thing. That's what you want your front office to do. They've obviously decided, and don't be surprised now if Clowney goes and signs a cheap deal. He might have signed a cheap deal because one of his major players just left the market. So don't judge this deal on what Clowney does, because we've forced Clowney into a corner. We obviously felt that the deal wasn't going to get done in our best interest. So we know he's signed for $11 million. These things with deals, it will take a week or so before the final number came out. The Hooper stuff, it was about 2 weeks before we knew the final details on that in terms of the 5th year for like avoidables. So we'll know down the line exactly what it is, but there's $2 million for incentives, and that's interesting. We don't know yet what they are. So there's 2 different types of incentives and how teams have to deal with them. So incentives can cover loads of stuff. They've got to play games. Do they make the Pro Bowl? Do they compete for loads of different stuff? There's lots of different things they can choose, but they drop into 2 groups. So one's called likely to be earned, and that means they did them last year. So if you gave him a per game incentive bonus, then he made 10 of the 16 games last year. So 10/16ths of that, you'd have to count that as likely to be earned. And then the rest of it, you count it as unlikely to be earned, because where the cap's in the future, you don't know yet what's going to earn. So you count some stuff, you don't count the other stuff, and then you just recalculate your cap in a year's time. So they're the 2 different types. To be fair, it doesn't matter too much for the Browns because we've got a bit of cash space at the minute. But if you ever hear people talk about likely and unlikely, not likely to be earned, it just means last year, did the player do X, Y, Z that they've got incentives for? It doesn't matter. You could have a player 9 straight years has gone to the Pro Bowl, missed it last year. For next year, you don't have to account for it until it's either earned, and then you add it on at a later date.
Yeah, this was so fascinating because the Browns restructured and they saved $4.5 million in the process. They came into the day prior to the restructuring at $37.1 million in cap space. Now they're over $41 million in cap space. There was some speculating that because of what's going on, the potential loss financially for clubs this year because of the pandemic, that could be a way for the Browns to save a little money. Do you read anything into, them restructuring a deal now like this, going into a season where they already were leading the league in cap space?
So this is just a smart restructure. So Vernon has next to no market out there. He'll know that. If there was no premier edge rusher, they probably can't get this deal done. If Clowney's signed, if Griffin had signed by now, then it's tough to let him go because you've got no stick of going, if you don't agree to this, we're going to go sign X, Y, Z. And so the Browns have probably just turned around to him and gone, look, you've got no protection. We can walk away. We're looking at these other players. We want to pay someone 11, but we're willing to go up to 13 if you're playing and doing well. Does that work for you? And he's agreed to it. And it's one, does it save him 4 million? Does it save him 2 million? Who knows? We'll get there at the end of the season and know, but he's a great player. Didn't like the trade at the time, but he is a productive edge rusher, limited by injuries. But that's why we need depth. We've got one nice piece in Adrian Claiborne on the 2-year deal I wanted. Let's add another one. We've got our different favourites here. So I'm banging the drum for Vinny Curry. I know you're banging the drum for Jabril Sheard, but we're going to get someone else. I feel really confident that there's going to be another name in that room. And who knows, that's where that 3-4 million just jumps on over to.
My bad. My mic was muted. But I know you wanted Vinny Curry. I've wanted Jabal Sheard. I know some fans are clamoring for Clay Matthews because the attachment of his dad. I'm wearing Clay Matthews Sr. shirt while we're recording. That doesn't make any sense. I would imagine Clay, at the end of his career, would go to a contender, a more sure contender. Cleveland's not a contender yet, to say the least. But, signing a guy like Vinny Curry or a Jabal Sheard, I think would help this team. I know some guys in the podcasting community and the blogging community like Porter Gustin. He did show a little bit at the end of the season when he got a chance to play. So, him being behind Garrett, Vernon, and Claiborne could be a good thing for him. Maybe they lean on Gustin. No one knows how these virtual workouts have gone, but I would like to see them add another pass rusher. Myself and Anthony have said constantly on this show, you can never have enough pass rushers, especially in today's NFL. But you did mention earlier that this eliminates us from signing Jadeveon Clowney. I know a lot of people wanted him, but I look at it like this. Him and Vernon, they're just as productive players. Clowney's got the bigger name because he was a former number 1 overall pick. He may have more flashier plays than Vernon, but Vernon is just as productive, and he's already been in the fold from all accounts. He's had a great offseason so far with the Browns. Despite all the rumors about his future, he's been a solid pro. So it makes sense for the Browns to work things out with Vernon at this point and keep him in the fold, at least for the 2020 season.
Yeah, sacks. Lots of people go to them as a measuring stick. It's horrendous. If you are asked to be graded on whether you're good or bad at your job and what happens when the elite, and we mean the top person that year, succeeded on 3% of the time, that's just not a good metric. Whoever your manager is needs to go out and find a better metric, because 3% is elite. That allows for such variation that it's just silly, and they're not stable from year to year. You start looking at pressures, stuff like that, it's pretty stable. It's happening more than obviously 3%, but that gives you a much better flavour. So for me, yeah, they're literally the same player. Personally, yeah, if you could have got them the same, I swing Clowney. I think there's more upside for the comp pick next year. Either way, they're leaving. He's got a no trade clause gone in with this deal. But I've always beat the drum, and I'll go back to the Paul DePodesta guardrails. One thing you spoke about is don't pay for depth. And I think it's important to remember, for me, there's 3 levels on the roster. You've got your starters, you've got your rotational pieces, and you've got your depth. And D-line is quite unique in the way it is a rotational piece. And it's why it sometimes can lack value, because if you're an edge rusher and you're great, you're playing about 66% of snaps. So that's not like an O-lineman. That's not a quarterback. That's not a DB. Linebacker in many cases will play 100% of snaps. You're playing about 66, and that means who on earth is going to be playing the other third of those snaps? And you're looking at sort of 2 players playing about 66% and 2 players playing about 40%, because sometimes they'll drop inside. So the amount of snaps a Claiborne and a Myles Garrett will get isn't that much difference. 25% is negligible. So for me, it's really important to make sure you invest in 4. And I like Paul Augustine. Solid name as your 5th name, because, hey, someone's going to go down this season. If not 1, 2, then you've got people up the line. And while there is injury questions, having that depth, you can just rotate out there, because we saw it season before last when forget his name, Greg Williams took over as head coach. We saw the snaps drop for Myles Garrett, and we saw his production go up. So that stuff happens. The idea that you can run Myles Garrett out there 80% of snaps, that's going to be it's going to be awesome, because Myles Garrett's still going to be awesome, but you're not going to get the most productive version of him. You're not going to get them high pressure numbers. So let's drop him down on what he needs to do, and let's ramp up his production.
Absolutely. One final note on Vernon before we go to the next topic. For everybody that's down on him and says he's not good, Pro Football Focus, since Vernon signed his big contract with the Giants a few years back, he ranks 21st among edge defenders in the National Football League in terms of their grading scale. And I think it was like an 86.3 or something like that. It's a really high number. So for those that just look at sacks, you need to look at the whole production. Like when Vernon's on the field, the Browns were a better defensive unit. So it's good to keep him around, because he's got a camaraderie with his teammates and he's a good player. Our next topic, J.C. Tretter, Browns center. He's head of the Players Union. They are going back and forth right now for how training camp and the preseason is going to go. Tretter spoke out again today about, the league and this is his words, unwilling to prioritize player safety, and believes that the virus will bend to football. The league cut the preseason in half last week. We talked about it on our last episode, from 4 games to 2. And, Tretter is pushing, and he said that the league and the players unions coronavirus task force agreed to a 48-day training camp without preseason games. Because if you remember back in 2011 when we had the lockout, when we came back, there was a lot of hamstring injuries, Achilles tendon injuries, just because there was no off-season programs. And that's much like that's going on now with the coronavirus pandemic. I don't think there should be preseason games at this point. Get these guys on the field, let them practice. You don't want to rush these guys out and then have a lot of injuries happening that could ruin guys' careers. I mean, this is a scary time, not in just for sports, but for the world with the coronavirus pandemic. It makes no sense to try to rush guys out on the field. They're already losing money because there's not going to be fans in the stands. Why try to rush out guys that might not be in the best shape right now just to play 2 meaningless preseason games? Jack, I mean, we talked about it on the last episode. The preseason at this point seems useless. Obviously, the players' union definitely agrees.
Yeah, I think the only way to sort of save it is to scrap the fixtures that are out there and go, look, play your most local team. New York plays New York, etc. as you go around the country, and just go, look, just play 1 game local. Not so much for the money, because it is useful to get players out there and sort of if Stefanski's chatting with Baker and the offense on here's what we're going to do, it's a good chance the defense already know the play. So it's hard for that defense to naturally play what the offense is giving you versus what they're going to do. So all of that trickery and stuff is suddenly a lot harder to sort of build in, play action passes, stuff like that. So for me, I could see a compromise of a slightly longer training camp, maybe not in length, but in amount of padded practices and time they get of going, look, we'll cut it to 1. We're going to do it behind closed doors. It's going to be a local one rather than a long distance one. And let's see what we can do. Or maybe they just allow 1 behind closed doors padded practices together like the team's done in the past. I know it's something they got rid of, but they go, look, have your padded practices if that's what teams really want. We don't really know what the dividing line of the NFL. They're not worried about making that much money off 2 preseason games because it's going to be pittance in the grand scheme of it anyway. But it wouldn't surprise me if there's sort of teams are pushing for, we want at least some practice against another team, sort of get an idea before week 1, because that's a lot of snaps. You're going out there and playing a whole game, and you're coming in cold if you haven't had at least sort of half a game in a preseason to really ramp it up. So I wouldn't be surprised if they try and find a compromise that gives a little bit of both. But yeah, 2 preseason games, that's over.
Yeah, there shouldn't be any. I don't think at this season for sure there shouldn't be any preseason games. The one you mentioned, like, have one geography, or I'm trying to find the word, relatively close. Like if we did like one like scrimmage against Cincinnati or Detroit, that would be fine. But like, don't try to, force 2 games where they have to travel cross country. You're going to be jet lagged, and then just have something catastrophically go wrong. That's not good for the NFL, and that's not good for these teams. Something else that has been brought up in the last week, the league has discussed shrinking camp rosters. Right now they already have 90, and then I think I don't remember if they trim it down twice, or they trim it down just from 90 to 53 at the end of the preseason. That doesn't make any sense either. I know they're trying to limit the amount of contact because of the coronavirus pandemic, but you would think that they might try to expand just in case there is a bunch of positive tests. Guys have to go away and quarantine. Like if they run out of certain players at position groups, like how are you going to fill those in if guys are going to have to be sidelined? I feel like limit the amount of people you have in your facility, but as far as a roster goes, I don't think you can trim that down just because you don't know how much of a outbreak you're going to have in one specific team.
Yeah, I think we're going to see the ramp up of practice squads. I think they're definitely going to be bigger this year. There might be some new rules to allow slightly more diverse people on them than there was in the past with like years of service, etc. Just so teams are covered, because the issue is if you're the Browns, if you're Patrick Mahomes, if you're Lamar Jackson, what happens if that player gets a positive test and they're out for 2 weeks? For me, the first thing I'm doing is rushing straight to the betting market and going crazy on the over-under, because that is going to be so tasty. I did the same thing for Sam Darnold and made a mint. So, no, I will be absolutely flying all over those. As soon as Rappaport tweets that someone's ill, boom, just bet. But it's one that, no team's prepared, and it's why maybe Cam Newton made sense. Because if you have a third quarterback with the Browns that is solid, what happens if 1-2 quarterbacks, they're spending a lot of time together? It's easy for, if one gets it, that they've accidentally passed it to the other before getting a test. So no, it's one that it's going to be a crazy season, because this stuff's going to happen throughout. We've been okay in the Premier League over in the UK. So there's not really been any issues, but it's one you've just got to be aware of because things can change. But so far, it's been perfectly fine. There's not really been any breakouts. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, I mean, like with the NBA and MLB, like there's been positive tests, but they also expanded their rosters. Like the NBA, they went from 15 to 17. It wasn't a major expansion, but it was big enough because some teams have had multiple positive tests before the bubble has even started. And with baseball, like they're going to start out, they usually have a 26-man roster. They're expanding to 30, and then every 2 weeks they're going to shrink it back down to 26. But they also have a alternate camp close to the team facility to where they have like 15 to 20 guys practicing and being ready just in case they have to come and join the team. So like I get the NFL, they would have 90 guys in a bubble, for instance, in Berea for the Browns. Like, I don't know if you want to shrink that. Like, if you're going to shrink it, how much are you going to shrink it by? Are you going to go from 90 to 75? Are you going to go, I mean, maybe like, if you're going to shrink it down, but then have those, like, take those 15 guys off the 90-man roster, for instance, put them in a local community college where they can still work out. And if there's positive tests, then the guys that are positive, go have them quarantined, but then bring those guys in so that you still have guys that can still practice and still be a part of the team per se, so that they're ready in case an outbreak happens or an injury happens, and you have those guys in your back pocket ready to go.
Yeah, it's one of them that lots of training camps use to decide who makes the practice squad and things like that. Because, in all honesty, I looked at the article right early on, sort of post draft, post free agency, and I was down to about 39 players at locks. There was probably about 30 of them that it's like these guys never making the roster. Nothing against them. It's just like you can see a backup fullback. It's like, yeah, he's not got a chance of making the roster. So that is what it is. So they could easily cut them down. But yeah, a lot of it is deciding who's on your practice squad. Whereas you go, we don't want this guy on our roster, but we do actually want to stash. I forget, ex-quarterback was with the Vikings, plays fullback now. The one we picked up. But that's the sort of player you go, yeah, we do want him, but we don't want him on our active roster. He's just one that's getting straight stashed on a practice squad. And that's going to be really tough because what do teams do there? Are they hoarding talent ready for who's on the final 53? Are they hoarding talent ready for the practice squad? So, yeah, do they potentially set up like a second Browns mini camp and send a load of players over there? It's possibly something they could do. They could probably cut down to 65 and know who's making the 53, and then have almost a practice squad mini camp. But then, if Kevin Stefanski and the main coaches are at the main training camp, how are they going to know who to keep from the practice mini camp?
I mean, that's a good question. I mean, there's a lot of assistant coaches. I mean, they could send a few of those guys, and it would be really convenient because down the street from the Browns training facility is I want to say it's Baldwin Wallace. It's a local small college. It's like literally right down the road. Have those guys go there because there's not going to be. I don't know what the potential of D2 or D3 college football is going to be like, because even the question of D1 college football is in the air because of the pandemic. Have those guys go work out down there. Keep them close. There's a ton of small colleges around the Cleveland area. Have those guys go work out there. Send a couple assistant coaches or assistant training coaches. Like, make sure that guys are staying in shape. Make sure they're studying the playbook, knowing the playbook, and then you have them in their back pocket just in case an outbreak were to happen and you need guys out on the field to practice and prepare for the season. So it's something to think about. Obviously, this will change as the weeks come because, we still don't know for sure if we're going to have training camp or even have a season because the United States is getting hit hard right now with a pandemic again, and it's unfortunate. Last topic we want to hit on today's episode, Patrick Mahomes broke the bank Monday afternoon as he signed a 10-year extension with the Chiefs. Now his contract is 12 years at length. It can go up to $503 million, but it's technically 12 years, $477 million. That extra $25 million is bonuses. Jack, first, what was your initial thoughts on that contract, especially the length, because we haven't seen a 10-year contract in the NFL since, I want to say, Brett Favre and Drew Bledsoe signed 10-year contracts back in 2001, and those are the last two that come to mind immediately.
Yeah, it was a surprise. So he's got a lot of guarantees in there, and it's really interesting how they've structured it. I think it gives him the peace of mind to know, look, you're getting a load of this money, you want to be here, but we're going to get a discount on the back end because based on where the league's going. So with any long contract, yeah, they're going to get a saving on the back end. But at the same time, if you get a big injury, then you're protected. The team isn't going to go anywhere. You're going to come back to it and take over. So I think it was a really good deal for both teams. Mahomes could have got much more money by doing it sort of a 3-year or 4 years at a time. But you don't know what's going to happen. So get that guaranteed, get it locked down. It's going to see what they do sort of long term with signing bonus restructure, because 2027 it looks like there's definitely going to be a rejig of the deal in there. But it's almost 2 deals. So you got that first deal, which is so you got 2 years already rolling on his deal. Then you got 5 years at about 40 million average, and then you've got 5 years at, is it 50 million average. So it just jumps basically from one year to the next. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens to the salary cap because no one really knows. Obviously, it might dip down a little bit, but he didn't add any more money into the next 2 years. So he stays as a dirt cheap deal, which obviously helps the Chiefs because if we're talking about a 20 million cut next year, 20 million cut the year after, then suddenly that doesn't bother them because it's going to go back up. So it's one, hey, we'll see what happens, but I think it's a really good deal. The key thing is, how does it affect Baker? How does it affect everything else? At the moment, no impact. So we're all good. We don't have to worry as Browns fans. If you're a Cowboys fan, or if you're potentially a Texans fan, you should be chewing your fingernails off because it is proper scary, particularly for Cowboys fans because loads of strength just went to Dak. They've now got to panic and get a deal through. And it's going to be interesting because they're the two deals that then impact Baker because if they go back to normal and this is seen as this is just an outlier, this is the future, potentially GOAT, he could be that good in Mahomes. And we're talking about him in 20 years rather than Brady as the greatest of all time, which it could certainly happen. Then that's when, if that knock-on happens and Dak's getting a similar deal, Watson's getting a similar deal, then it's going to happen for the Browns. But I can't see Baker getting paid in 12 months' time. 2 years' time, he's going to get paid. He's going to be a massively rich man, but it's not happening in 12 months' time. He needs a little bit more proof he's done it because there's been ups and downs. But if he gets it right, 2 years' time, he's going to be a happy, happy man.
Yeah, this deal is so fascinating to me because I'm looking at the structure of it now on Over the Cap, and yesterday was the first time I heard guaranteed mechanisms. That was the first time I heard that in terms of a contract language. It's like every year he has a roster bonus, and that's like the big chunk of his deal for the first like 6 or 7 years. And you brought up 2027, his cap number is going to be $59.9 million. That's the year where I think like the Chiefs are just going to be like, because Mahomes going to be 32. And at that point, if he's still putting up incredible numbers, he stays healthy. I just see they're going to tear that up and sign him to another hypothetical 10-year extension and just be like, we're not going anywhere. We don't want you to go anywhere. Just sign this quote unquote lifetime contract and you're with us for the rest of your career. You're the big cap percentage guy. And there was talk yesterday that they were going to potentially tie this to a cap percentage number. They didn't do that. When the contract kicks in 2022, he's only going to be tied to 13.8% of the cap. 2023, 17.6%. And then 2024 is the final year of that, where you see the cap percentage numbers, 15.6. So when they say it's a team-friendly deal, and when Ben Albright is saying that this contract is going to look like a steal in 3 or 4 years, I think they're right, just looking at it right now. Of course, we don't know what the salary cap is going to look like. I think we all, can agree that it's going to dip a little bit. But then once the TV contracts kick in, the cap's going to skyrocket, and it's going to benefit the Chiefs because Mahomes is practically on a steal. But it's going to benefit Dak Prescott potentially, Deshaun Watson, Baker Mayfield, Lamar Jackson, all these incredible quarterbacks coming down the line. And then hopefully, Burrow and Tua, they reap the benefits from it here in a few years as long as they stay healthy and be what we all think they're going to be. These guys are going to benefit, but not just quarterbacks. Maybe Myles Garrett waits a year to see what happens. I don't see that. I feel like they're going to try to get this done now, and hopefully it's going to be team-friendly for the Browns as well. But once the cap skyrockets because of the TV deal, you think the contracts are crazy now. I think they're going to be even crazier in a year or two.
Yeah, and it's still a big jump because if we look at the amount of quarterbacks in that sort of 35 to 30 range, we'll start at the top with, and just an average per year, you've got Russell Wilson 35, Big Ben 34, Goffin, Rodgers 33.5, Cousins 33, Carson Wentz 32, Dak Prescott's 31.4 because of the tag, but that will get sorted. Ryan's 30. And then Patrick Mahomes, if we take the two deals separate, he's basically signed a 5-year, 39 million a year deal. That is massive as a jump. Just taking those 5 years, almost forget the back end and forget the like 45 million, because when you start comparing that, it's not realistic. Those sort of his deal when it's going to be at 50 million, all these players are going to either be retired or on a completely different deal that's much closer. So it's one that it's really interesting how it's been done. It's got that big jump in that they can flip it to signing bonus and sort of push that big year in 2027 down the road, because they can go, look, we're going to take 50 million that. Let's put it as a 5-year signing bonus, and we'll do 10 million a year and have actually a really cheap year that year. But the real advantage you've got is a quarterback makes up the largest single part of the NFL salary cap for any team. Knowing what your quarterback's going to be on potentially for the next 12 years, and then having a mechanism, because of the way it's done with roster bonus, to push all that money back lots of years with a signing bonus, gives you really, really amazing flexibility, because they're not thinking, oh, Patrick Mahomes is going to be up in 2 years again. Right, we need to be cap flexible because he might demand more money. We might not be doing very well because who knows, Andy Reid might retire and the team might tail off a little bit. He's not going to be able to force a move out. He signed this ridiculous deal forever. So it's one that if you're running that team's salary cap, you're going to be through the roof. You're going to be having a pie. You go, look, we know where we're at for the next 12 years. Chris Jones, you're gone. Good luck wherever you end up. But it's like you can make moves and be like, right, put the percentage up there. Everything moves. The cap goes up. Suddenly, if we're talking Patrick Mahomes at 8 to 10% of the salary cap, while everyone else is on 13, 14, then wow. Goodbye NFL. Goodbye AFC East. You better get used to a Chiefs dynasty, because this could get messy.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that they can manipulate that contract to a degree and then be able to continue to build around him, and then he, I think, would be willing to restructure his deal if it meant putting talent around him, and like he said, build a dynasty in Kansas City. Like, it's scary to think about because of how talented he is, but to know that they can continue to put pieces around him, and he seems like the ultimate team player, that he'd be willing to restructure that deal to keep talent or add talent. I mean, and they seem to draft well too, and Andy Reid definitely seems to get the most out of his like late round talent and all that. So it's kind of dangerous to think about what the Chiefs could be like for the next decade.
Yeah, and every player loves a signing bonus restructure, because all you're saying is, oh, that 10 million we were giving you across this entire season, you get week by week. What we're going to do, we're going to give it to you straight away, and then we'll account for it on the salary cap over the next 5 years, so you're less likely to get cut. And it's like it's just a massive win-win for a player anytime they can structure a deal. And it's something they did with Tyreek Hill. I don't know if that's because it was off field, but if you're setting up that way, it's a really nice position to be in. So don't be surprised if that's something we see the Browns take a look at and go, we're not nicking the overall deal, but the idea of going really heavy on roster bonus rather than signing bonus and other things, which they did with like Hooper and Conklin and even Keenum in a way, they might actually nick that and go, we like this idea. It's got its risks because obviously if they ever want to move on from Mahomes, they're pretty much screwed now forever. But it's not a bad place to be at.
Last question, Jack. Is there anybody on the Browns roster that you would give a 10-year contract to right now?
Not a chance.
No? Not even Miles?
No, not in any way. There's no one I would even consider anything close to that. Miles has obviously got the potential because you're looking around 6 years for elite pass rushers. But if you look at like JJ Watt, people are questioning JJ Watt. Why is he playing on such a cheap number? That's because he had a 6-year deal that looked really, really good at the time. And now he looks like the poor boy on the defensive line. Obviously, he's had his injuries, but when he's playing, he is an absolute bargain at that price. So, no, for me, no, I'm not interested in paying for that. I looked back since 2011, and I thought, how many quarterbacks have come out that are worth that money and I can justify it? Russell Wilson, Patrick Mahomes. You get about one every 5 years that you say that guy's elite, and I feel confident he's going to stay at that level. We're just looking for a quarterback that's top 10 on a regular basis. If we can get that, we're in a really, really good position to compete. But Baker's not, for me, going to be Russell Wilson or Patrick Mahomes, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's not a bad thing. That's just life. There's two phenomenal franchise quarterbacks. We just need to find a top 10 guy.
Absolutely. We thank everybody for listening to today's episode of 1085 Gridiron. You can follow me on Twitter at JackMcCurry08. You can follow Jack at Jack Duffin. Check out thedogland.com for the latest on Browns news, Browns analysis. Stay tuned to the podcast and the site next week. We're going to start previewing the upcoming 2020 season. Hopefully there's a 2020 season, but definitely stay tuned to the podcast as well as thedogland.com. And with that, as we get on out of here, go Browns.
Go Browns.